Welcome. This content was generated by artificial intelligence, so it may contain errors. Please listen carefully and critically evaluate everything you hear.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're undertaking one of the most critical deep dives we've ever done. It's really a mission to unearth the original, specific, and I'd say revolutionary concept of Christian hope.
It's so necessary.
Because when we talk about the future, heaven, eternity, what comes next, we often end up using these cliches. They're comforting, sure, but they just don't seem to fit the power of what we read in the New Testament.
That's absolutely right. Our source material for today, which is a collection of key theological works on this very issue, it really highlights a pervasive problem. I mean, whether you look inside the church or out in the wider culture, there's just massive confusion about the core promise of Christianity, the popular understanding of the future. It often sounds like a thin layer of scripture just painted over a much older Greek philosophy.
And that original vision, the pure one, the one that launched a global movement, that's what we are chasing. Our mission today is to understand the precise, specific faith of the early Christians about the future and to, contrast it sharply with these modern hazy beliefs.
And the starting point is critical.
It is. Here's the essential part. We cannot begin with the individual.
That is the structural risk, and it's a massive one. If we start by asking, so where do I go when I die? We immediately confine God's grand plan to this very narrow, platonically influenced box.
Right.
For centuries, especially since the medieval period, Western thought has elevated this idea of the disembodied soul escaping the physical world. And the result is this huge focus on individual spiritual survival, but it comes at the expense of the universe's destiny.
It's like watching, an epic 10-hour historical drama, but you only care about the fate of one minor character in the second act.
Exactly. And if we begin with the individual soul, we risk treating the true hope, this grand renewal of the entire cosmos, as just decorative embroidery around the edges.
Just a nice little bonus.
Precisely. We have to invert that focus. We must begin with the cosmic vision because it is the essential context for everything else. The biblical narrative is about the Creator God renewing the entire present cosmos, the heavens and the earth, from top to bottom.
That's the main story.
That is the overarching plot, the great drama. Our personal destiny, our resurrection, our salvation, those are the little dramas, the play within the play. Understanding God's purpose for the world as a whole is what gives proper shape to our individual hope, especially concepts like bodily resurrection and the second coming.
Okay, so let's unpack this larger vision. And I think to do that, we first need to clear the decks. Our sources lay out two major options that have become incredibly powerful cultural myths. Myths that borrow Christian vocabulary, but ultimately steer us away from where the New Testament wants to take us.
They're very seductive myths because they do offer a sense of meaning or purpose, but they fail the reality test.
Let's start with option one, evolutionary optimism. You might also know it as the myth of progress.
This myth is just so deeply embedded in the modern Western psyche. It has its roots, way back in the Renaissance with its focus on human capacity. Then it matured through the Enlightenment's belief in reason. And then it just exploded during the 19th century boom of scientific and economic advances.
So the core belief is what?
The core belief is that the human project, and really the cosmos itself, will just inherently continue to grow, to develop, and to inevitably improve.
History, in this view, is basically marching inexorably toward a utopia, a global El Dorado, a millennium that is achieved mostly through human effort and our own ingenuity.
Exactly. It's the modernist faith. Human perfection achieved by education, by hard work, by the steady upward climb of science and technology. We take the raw material of the world, we apply our immense intellect, and we engineer a perfect society.
It's the narrative every politician and tech guru sells us, isn't it? The future will be solved by the next algorithm, the next breakthrough, the next election.
Yes, but our sources are really clear in categorizing this as a parody of the Christian vision.
Why a parody?
Because the goal, the utopia, it emerges from within the process. There's no divine intervention, no new creation from outside. It basically suggests that humanity is Prometheus, perpetually defying the old gods and trying to run the world entirely on our own steam. And this idea of progress, it really permeated Christian thought during the 19th and early 20th centuries.
Right. You saw it in movements that sometimes fused social reform with things like social Darwinism.
And the most famous attempt to fuse this progress myth with Christian spirituality involves the French Jesuit and paleontologist Pierre Teilhard de Chardin.
A fascinating figure.
Absolutely remarkable. A mystic and a scientist who saw the divine spirit involved in every single stage of evolution. He theorized that the world was moving toward the spiritual climax he called the Christ Omega point, where cosmic and human evolution would fully disclose the spirit.
He was trying to use that Pauline idea of the cosmic Christ,
Yeah.
with the one who holds all things together.
That's the one, from Colossians 1. He was trying to use that to justify this upward march. It's a beautiful attempt.
It provides a very elegant spiritual framework for the scientific process, but if we look at the critique, this whole system shares the fatal flaws of the general myth of progress. Let's break those down. The first one is it's overwhelming. The problem of evil.
This is the Achilles heel. It really is. The myth cannot deal with radical evil. If history is just a simple upward line of ascent, how do you explain the horrors of the 20th century? Auschwitz, the Gulag, world wars.
Or even the chronic social evils we face today, like massive poverty or drug epidemics.
Exactly. If evolution, as it's currently constituted, gave us the technological capacity for Hiroshima, just plowing ahead offers no assurance that we're going to iron out those fundamental moral glitches in the system.
So it just assumes that evil is a temporary imperfection, a speed bump on the road to glory.
Yes. It fails to develop a practical moral strategy to address severe structural evil. It just says, keep evolving, while completely ignoring the fact that the human heart, left to itself, constantly rebels.
Okay, flaw number 2 is scientific contradiction. Modern science itself kind of undermines the faith that the cosmos is marching towards some inherent utopia.
Precisely. Cosmology provides a much, much bleaker picture than 19th century optimists assumed. The universe is governed by entropy. It's heading either for what they call the big cool down, where it expands into cold darkness and all energy is diffused.
Oh, the crunch.
Or the big crunch, where it collapses back on itself. Neither of those scenarios remotely fits the myth of progress leading to some kind of eternal, natural human glory.
And the third flaw is retrospective, but maybe the most damning. It's the ethical dilemma of suffering. Even if utopia arrived tomorrow, perfect society, no illness, no hunger, it wouldn't undo the moral injury of all the suffering that came before.
This is a point that gets missed so often. If God builds his glorious kingdom on the bones and ashes of every victim, every casualty, every person who suffered injustice along the way, I mean, what kind of just creator is that? The solution has to account for the past.
It reminds me of that anecdote you mentioned earlier, the old Oxford Don whose desk was just such a mess of papers he couldn't face it.
Ah, yes. The tale goes that whenever the papers became just utterly overwhelming, the Don would simply spread a copy of the Times newspaper over the entire pile and start putting new papers on top.
Just start fresh.
Exactly. And when they finally cleared his office after he died, they found several layers of newspapers covering decades of unresolved administrative matters. The myth of progress does the same thing. It just puts a new newspaper over the unresolved suffering of history and tries to move on. It leaves God with precisely the same problem.
So the true radical solution that the Christian story asserts is not an upward evolutionary march at all.
No, it's the Creator God going down into the dark, the cross to decisively deal with evil and rescue the world from its plight. That downward movement, God's decisive no to rebellious idolatry, is the prerequisite for his final yes to creation. This is the radical break with human-centered progress that the early Christians proclaimed.
Okay, so if progress fails because it ignores the darkness of history, the second great myth fails by simply dismissing history altogether. Let's turn to option 2, souls in transit. This is the ultimate spiritual escapism, and is primarily influenced by the Greek philosopher Plato.
This worldview begins with a fundamental rejection of space, time, and matter. It's influenced by Plato's famous allegorical cave, and it views the physical world, the one we touch and smell and inhabit, as transient, illusory, and inferior. Just flickering shadows.
So the goal is escape.
The highest goal for the human being, therefore, is escaping the material, getting rid of the body, and achieving a pure, disembodied existence.
So the fundamental problem isn't moral rebellion or sin in this view. The problem is just the fact of embodiment itself. The problem is decay, gravity, the fact that we're bound by time.
Exactly. And this strain entered Christian thought very, very early on, notably through Gnosticism, a movement so influential that the early church fought it tooth and nail.
And what did the Gnostics teach?
They taught that the material world was inferior, maybe even created by a lesser dark deity. Creation itself was seen as the fundamental fall, the moment when the pure spirit got trapped in the gross material body. So salvation, which they called gnosis, was the secret knowledge that enabled the spirit to escape back to a pure realm.
And how does this manifest in the modern church? I mean, it sounds a bit antiquated, but you hear echoes of it everywhere.
Oh, we see it in what's often called just passing through spirituality. Think of that common assumption that the central purpose of being Christian is just to go to heaven when you die and live as a disembodied spirit forever.
Right.
This fosters an attitude where the created world, our culture, our politics, ecology, the arts, it's all irrelevant. It's temporary, just something to be endured until we get our ticket punched for the spiritual sphere.
And the implications of that kind of spiritual apathy are profound, aren't they? Particularly when it comes to the environment.
They are devastating. If your final destiny is purely spiritual and non-material, and the space-time universe is doomed to be scrapped anyway, burned up, as some interpretations suggest, then why worry about caring for it?
It's a disposable planet.
It justifies anti-ecological practices, where the planet is treated as disposable. Why invest immense effort into mitigating climate change or protecting rainforests if God is just going to destroy the whole thing soon? This soft Gnosticism is entirely antithetical to the central biblical affirmation that creation is good.
Which brings us, finally, to the authentic alternative. What is this surprising vision that the New Testament actually gives us? The one that rejects both human progress and spiritual escapism.
We begin with the fundamental structure, the explicit rejection of dualism. The early Christians did not operate with a worldview that pitted an evil physical world against a good spiritual world. They believed God was going to put the world to rights, to judge it and redeem it, not abandon it. And this vision is built on three unbreakable theological themes.
Okay, let's take them one by one. Theme A, the goodness of creation.
Creation is good. Inherently and structurally, it is a gift from God, but crucially, it is other than God. This is a powerful refutation of pantheism, which says God is the world.
And why is that distinction so important?
Because creation was made to reflect God's glory back to the Creator in worship, and to reflect God's wisdom into the rest of creation through human stewardship, our image-bearing role. If you collapse that distinction between creator and created, you actually lose the ability to define evil.
Okay, which brings us to theme B, the nature of evil. If evil isn't matter, or the fact that things change and decay, what is it?
Evil, biblically, is rebellious idolatry. It is the human choice to worship and honor elements of the created world, things like power, status, objects, rather than the God who made them. This is the spiritual treason that causes the entire cosmos to be out of joint.
So natural decay, like a tree dropping its leaves, that's not evil.
That's a great point, no. That kind of decay or the slow slide into old age is not necessarily evil, it's just transience. It's a signpost pointing forward to the future God has in store.
Wait, let's pause on a technical distinction you raised earlier because it's so important here. The issue isn't a battle of substance's good spirit versus evil matter. It's a battle of ages.
Yes. The crucial distinction is eschatological duality, not ontological dualism.
Can you break down the difference between those two for us? Why is confusing them so dangerous for understanding God's plan?
Absolutely. Ontological dualism refers to the nature of existence. Ontos means being. It's that Gnostic or Platonic view that physical substance is bad and spiritual substance is good. If you believe this, the solution is escape getting rid of the bad matter.
Okay.
Eschatological duality, however, refers to history. Eschaton means the end, or the goal. So it's the contrast between the present age, this era of sin, death, and decay, and the age to come, the new, renewed, redeemed creation God is bringing.
So the goal is transformation of the present age, not abandoning it.
Exactly. Confusing them is what leads to the escapist myth. The problem is not creation's substance, but its corruption in time.
Which leads us directly to theme C, the plan of redemption.
Since the slavery is sin, not embodiment, redemption has to liberate what has been enslaved. It can't just scrap creation.
And because creation's corruption stems from rebellion, not from being physical, redemption has to involve a newly embodied life.
Precisely. The incarnation God becoming flesh in Jesus is the fulfillment of this entire plan. It affirms the goodness of creation at the highest possible level. And the cross is the central act that brings the good creation back into harmony with the wise creator by decisively absorbing the punishment for that rebellious idolatry.
This structure leads us right into the powerful images the New Testament uses to describe this total cosmic renewal. And these aren't blueprints, are they? They're more like high-definition poetic metaphors.
That's a great way to put it.
Let's start with the agricultural one, seed time and harvest.
Paul uses this so forcefully in 1 Corinthians 15. He identifies Jesus as the first fruits of the great harvest, and this guarantees the certainty of the future resurrection. In the ancient world, the first fruits were the proof that the rest of the crop was coming.
So Jesus' resurrection wasn't a one-off miracle.
Not at all. It was the sample of what God intends for the rest of his world. And this image so elegantly captures the necessary continuity and discontinuity.
How so?
Well, the seed you sow is not the glorious plant that springs up, that's discontinuity, but they are connected, that's continuity. The new resurrection body will be recognizably you, tied to your history and your identity, but it'll be radically transformed, transcending corruption and decay.
And it also suggests grace, right? Like the exodus from slavery. It's a gift, not something we achieve through evolution.
Exactly. It's a rejection of progress by natural means. Okay, image number 2, the victorious battle.
A very royal, kingly image.
Yes, drawn from the Psalms and the prophets. It emphasizes the king establishing his kingdom through conquest. Jesus rules until every power that currently holds creation, hostage political systems, social injustices, spiritual forces, is subjected to him. And the final great enemy to be defeated is death itself.
So death isn't natural.
It is not natural. It is the ultimate distortion of creation, and it must be conquered. This stands directly against the scientific contradiction of the progress myth, which sees everything running down because of entropy.
This reverses entropy.
It reverses entropy. It announces an act of new creation that transforms that cosmic runout. The king, having established his rule on Earth, conquers the ultimate consequence of the fall, transforming the entire structure of the universe by defeating death, the last enemy.
Okay, the third image, and this is one that gets misunderstood constantly, is highly political. Citizens of heaven colonizing the earth.
This comes mainly from Philippians 3. And to understand it, you have to remember who Paul was writing to. Philippi was a Roman colonia.
And a colonia wasn't just any town.
Not at all. It was a little slice of Rome, established far away, populated by retired soldiers, asserting Roman law and culture in a foreign land. So when Paul writes that their citizenship is in heaven, it is not an instruction to spiritually evacuate.
It's the opposite.
Absolutely. In that context, being a citizen of heaven meant that Rome, the mother city, the capital, would send aid, laws, and most importantly, the emperor himself. The citizens weren't fleeing to Rome. They were waiting for the king to come from the heavenly mother city to transform and put his colony, this earth, to rights.
Wow, that just reframes that whole passage.
Yeah.
We often hear that phrase, he will transform our humble bodies, as a reason to ditch our bodies.
But Paul means transformation into a body fit for the new creation. The king arrives to transform the physical reality of the colony, starting with the physical bodies of his citizens, making them worthy of ruling the renewed world. It is a definitive rejection of scrapping our present physicality.
Okay, image number 4, a very profound theological statement. God will be all in all. That's from 1 Corinthians 15.
This is the historical goal of creation, and it refutes pantheism because the tense is future. It hasn't happened yet. The profound mystery here is God's intention to completely fill, flood, and drench the entire creation with his presence, his love, his glory. It's the moment where the full meaning of creation is finally realized.
That recalls that prophetic image, doesn't it? The earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. But how can the waters cover the sea? The sea is already water.
And that's the paradox of the relationship between creator and creature. It implies that the cosmos is designed as a receptive vessel, the sea to be utterly filled, yet it remains distinct. It is the paradox of perfect love, where complete union and complete independence don't cancel each other out. This defeats both dualism, which rejects the world, and pantheism, which collapses the world into God.
Image 5, new birth, which we find so vividly in Romans 8.
Paul paints creation here as a pregnant woman groaning, waiting in slavery, suffering birth pangs. This was a traditional Jewish metaphor for the violent, difficult emergence of the new age from the current one. Creation is on tiptoe with expectation, waiting specifically for the glorification of God's children.
Waiting for human beings to finally step into their role as image bearers.
Yes. The renewal of creation is intrinsically linked to the glorification of humanity. What happened to Jesus at Easter, that transition from corruptible to incorruptible, is what the whole cosmos is dramatically waiting to witness in all of Jesus' followers. It ensures a drastic, dramatic birth of new creation from the womb of the old. So you have discontinuity in power, but continuity in substance.
And finally, image 6, which is really the culmination of the entire biblical narrative, maybe the most stunning picture of all, the marriage of heaven and earth in Revelation 21 and 22.
This is the ultimate explicit rejection of Gnosticism. It's a moment of profound relief in the story. The New Jerusalem, the city of God, heaven's presence, comes down out of heaven like a bride adorned for her husband.
It comes down. It doesn't stay up there.
It comes down. This shows that heaven and earth are not rivals. They are two different dimensions of creation that were always made for each other. They are finally joined in a new, unified way.
And there's no temple in this new city. Why is that?
Because the temple, going all the way back to Genesis, was always the physical signpost, the place where God's presence was concentrated. When the reality, God dwelling fully with his people, is finally here, the signpost is redundant. But the vision doesn't end with passive worship.
No, the work continues.
The redeemed engage in future creative tasks. The leaves of the tree of life are for the healing of the nations. The project isn't over.
This whole sweeping cosmic vision, it forces us to radically rethink the return of Jesus, particularly by focusing on the Ascension, which is a feature that's often overlooked or just sort of collapsed into the resurrection story.
The Ascension is not an optional extra. It is a vital, distinct theological feature. If you ignore it, you inevitably fall back into one of those two great myths we talked about. It fundamentally demands that we move away from thinking about heaven and earth as two separate physical locations, like two different planets.
And move towards what?
Towards a relational view of space.
Okay, what does a relational view of space mean practically?
It means heaven is not just up there in the sky, it is God's space. It's the control room, the ultimate dimension of creation from which all authority flows. Jesus' ascension means that in his thoroughly embodied, risen state, he has been inaugurated into that control room, and he is exercising authority over creation from there. All authority is given to me in heaven and on earth.
Right.
Being in God's dimension allows him to be simultaneously present everywhere on earth through the Spirit, yet physically absent.
And that concept of the Lord's physical absence is key to understanding the church's behavior between now and the end.
It is the corrective to two opposing failures. Ignoring Jesus' absence as the reigning Lord tempts the church to expand to fill the vacuum. It starts identifying its own structures, its leadership, its customs, its political opinions with the kingdom of God. And the result is hollow triumphalism.
The arrogance of power.
The arrogance of power, the insolence of office. It happens when the church forgets it is just an imperfect vessel. And on the flip side, when those structures inevitably fail, as they always do,
You get shallow despair.
Exactly. The Ascension asserts that Jesus is Lord over us, ruling from above, not merely within us or identified with our earthly institutions. It provides the necessary check on human arrogance and institutional pride. We are waiting for the king to appear, not trying to be the king ourselves.
So we're waiting for that final element.
Yeah.
The personal presence of Jesus, which we traditionally call the second coming. But our source materials suggest that even that terminology is potentially misleading, and we should focus on the original Greek terms.
That's right. The primary focus in the New Testament is on parousia and appearing phanerche. The term second coming is actually quite rare. Parousia literally means presence or presence as opposed to absence. And in the first century, that was a word that was absolutely loaded with meaning.
You mentioned two specific meanings in that era.
First, it was used for the mysterious, powerful presence of a god, often shown through a healing or a sudden rescue. But the second and far more politically explosive meaning was the royal presence of the emperor visiting a specific province or city. The absent ruling emperor suddenly appears in person to execute judgment, distribute benefits, and transform the local political landscape. Critically, neither of these uses implied the cosmic collapse of the place being visited.
Okay, this political context drastically reframes the most debated passage in all of eschatology. 1 Thessalonians 4. The text often cited as the basis for the modern rapture theory. The part where believers are snatched up to meet the Lord in the air.
That text is a classic example of highly charged political metaphor being read with modern, literalistic eyes. Paul is combining several ancient tropes, including the imperial visit. Let's imagine the Roman governor announcing the parousia of Caesar. When the emperor visited a city, the citizens would not wait passively inside the walls. They would go out to meet him.
They'd go out some distance from the city, and this action, going out to meet the dignitary, it had a specific name, didn't it?
It was called the epantasis, the meeting. But here's the critical point. They didn't go out to the countryside to flee the city with the emperor. They went out to escort him royally back into the city itself. The city was his domain, and they were bringing him home to take up his residence and rule.
So the meaning is the exact inverse of the modern popular reading.
It is. The point is not that the saved believers flee earth to be whisked away to heaven. They go out to greet the returning Lord and bring him back to earth, his renewed domain.
If Paul had meant escape, he would have used a different word.
He would have used a clear term for escape or ascent. By using the established political metaphor of apantasis and combining it with the transformation of the body, he makes it clear that the focus is on the triumphant king taking up his reign on a renewed earth. Rapture theology, by encouraging a kind of Gnostic quietism, often becomes a theology of political and ecological disengagement, which runs completely counter to Paul's original challenge to the Roman status quo.
And the culmination of this parousia is Jesus taking his role as judge.
And we have to emphasize that God's judgment is fundamentally good news. For those who live in a world riddled with systematic injustice, with oppression, with bullying, the promise of a final righteous judgment is the ultimate hope.
The psalmists celebrated it.
They celebrated it because it meant God would finally put the world to rights. The trees of the field would literally clap their hands in anticipation.
So Jesus takes on that role of the Messiah, the Son of Man from Daniel 7, receiving authority from the Ancient of Days to execute this justice.
And this judgment isn't some distant, abstract transaction. It is tied directly to our present lives. Paul is absolutely clear that future judgment will be according to works. That's in 2 Corinthians 5. This is a point that often causes confusion for people focused on faith alone. But the New Testament sees these two truths as perfectly integrated.
So how does that work? If we're justified by faith, how can we simultaneously be judged according to our works?
Let's use a courtroom metaphor. Justification by faith is God's advanced declaration. It's issued in the present moment, and it anticipates the future verdict on the last day. The final verdict will be righteous, and it will be based on the totality of a life, which necessarily includes the body of evidence.
So God declares me righteous now because he knows what the final evidence will show.
Exactly. Faith is the means by which we are brought into right relationship with the judge. It's our legal status, our works, the actions we do in love and obedience through the Spirit. They become the evidence, the fruit of that relationship, not the cause of it.
That's a critical distinction.
And the person who issues the final verdict is the Messiah who loved sinners, who died for them, and who absorbed the world's judgment on the cross. This makes him uniquely placed to judge both the human heart and the distorted systems of the world.
This whole understanding of cosmic renewal, the royal parousia, and justified works, it finally brings us to our individual destiny. We now need to reorganize our language around what you call life after death.
Yes. Bodily resurrection is the central engine that drives all of Christian hope. We have to reorganize our vocabulary about heaven around resurrection, not the other way around. If we downplay resurrection, we don't just lose a theological fine point, we lose the mechanism that gives all our present work its meaning and its permanence.
And the New Testament suggests a two-stage journey for the believer immediately upon death.
Yes. The two stages are the most coherent way to read the scripture. First, you have the intermediate state, or paradise, which occurs immediately upon death. The real person, that person's identity, consciousness, and memory, is in a state of restful happiness, enjoying communion with Christ, as Paul says, which is far better.
But this state is temporary. I'm thinking of Jesus' words to the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise."
That is the key reference point for this stage. Paradise means a blissful garden of rest. The Greek word Paul uses in some related contexts, monai, translates to dwelling places or temporary stops on a journey. It is a state of peaceful waiting, a holding pattern where the departed are fully present with Christ prior to the final great event. It is not, however, the final destination.
The final state is the bodily resurrection, the life after death. So what is the new body like? The contrast isn't physical versus spiritual, so what is it?
The contrast, particularly in 1 Corinthians 15, is between corruptible physicality and incorruptible physicality. Paul differentiates between the body that's animated by psycho, which is the natural, earthly, human life force, and the future body that's animated by pneuma, the spirit of God's new life. It will be a spirit-infused, glorious body.
That distinction between psycho and pneuma is vital.
It is. Our current bodies, our psycho bodies, are constantly subject to decay, to sickness, to gravity, and eventual death. The future body, the pneuma body, is powered by the eternal, uncreated energy of God. It will be more solid, more substantial, and more real than our present one. It will transcend the constraints of time and space as we know them.
C.S. Lewis captured that, didn't he, when he spoke of the weight of glory?
The weight of glory, yes. It is reality turned up to 11.
And the purpose of this glorious, incorruptible body, it's not eternal rest or, cloud lounging, as is often imagined.
No. The new body is given to fulfill the original Genesis mandate, to rule wisely over God's new world. We will be engaged in new creative tasks within the renewed cosmos. Every skill, every talent, every act of beauty or justice we practiced in this life is not wasted. It will be enhanced and given back to us to be exercised to God's glory in the New Jerusalem.
That makes the concept of reward much less awkward for the modern believer.
Reward, biblically, is organically connected to our present faithful activity. It's not an arbitrary payment. If you spend your life learning how to paint beautifully to glorify God, the reward isn't a pile of cash. The reward is receiving a perfected, glorious body capable of painting on a scale you cannot imagine in a world that is completely perfect.
So all our work matters.
That's Paul's ultimate conclusion. Because of the resurrection, your hard work in the gospel is not in vain.
Okay, let's apply this robust, embodied vision to the thorny issues of the final reckoning. Purgatory, paradise, and hell. We'll start with purgatory. It offers a lot of comfort for many. This idea of a second chance to clean up the mess. If the reformers rejected it, what is the biblical mechanism for dealing with the persistent, minor sins we commit right up to the point of death?
That is a crucial question. Purgatory is a late Western theological innovation, and it was developed partly to deal with those lingering imperfections. The reformers, however, saw that the cross of Christ deals completely and totally with all sins, major and minor. Bodily death itself, in a very real sense, destroys the sinful person, the entity that was subject to corruption. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ.
So if the reformers are right, the true purging process isn't some post-mortem fire.
No, it is the sufferings and refining processes of the present life. This life, with its struggles, its repentance, its sanctification, this is the furnace we pass through. The idea of purgatory often functions as a projected allegory of our present struggles. Therefore, there's no need for a separation between saints in heaven and souls in purgatory.
Which brings us to paradise and the communion of saints. If all departed Christians are in the same state, this restful happiness, what does that imply for devotional practice, particularly praying to the saints?
It implies that all departed Christians are in the same restful state. They are all our brothers and sisters, and they are all saints. This allows for a really robust understanding of the communion of saints. We're all united across the dimension of death. We can certainly pray for and with them, not that they get out of a punitive state, but that they are refreshed with God's joy and peace as they await the resurrection.
But the New Testament promise of immediate access to the Father through Christ and the Spirit, that remains paramount.
Precisely. If, through Christ, we have a royal welcome awaiting us right now in the very throne room of God, why would we linger in the outer lobby trying to persuade someone else to put in a good word for us? The invocation of saints as mediators, while it's been historically comforting for some, it does undermine this central New Testament blessing, direct, immediate access to the Father through the finished work of Jesus Christ.
And finally, hell and judgment.
Yeah.
This is a topic often dominated by lurid medieval or modern fundamentalist imagery. We need to ground this in the New Testament term Gehenna.
Right. Gehenna originally referred to the Valley of Hinnom, which was the constantly smoldering rubbish heap outside Jerusalem where refuse and sometimes bodies were burned. Jesus' warnings about Gehenna often functioned first and foremost as a political and historical warning against the impending Roman destruction around AD 70.
He was saying, in effect, stop this path or you'll be destroyed.
Yes. Unless the Jewish people repented of their rebellious, violent, and idolatrous dreams, Rome would turn Jerusalem into a hideous, burning rubbish heap. So the ultimate postmortem judgment is an extension of that immediate political judgment.
This brings us to the nature of final loss. The New Testament forbids a cheap universalism. God has to eliminate that which persistently distorts his creation.
That's the necessity. God must establish a world where justice reigns, and permanent rebellion cannot be tolerated. So we're faced with the terrible mystery of final loss. Our sources suggest a resolution that hinges on the definition of sin as idolatry and the progressive dehumanization that it entails.
Explain that principle.
Yeah.
That we become like what we worship.
It's the primary moral law of human life. You become like what you worship. If humans persistently worship idols, whether it's money or power or political ideology or physical appetites, they gradually cease to reflect the image of God. They turn toward non-being, toward the void, reflecting the lifelessness of the idols they serve.
And after death, the logical, horrifying conclusion of that freely chosen path
Is that they become creatures that once were human but now are not, having passed beyond hope, beyond pity. This is not God actively torturing them in a cosmic concentration camp for eternity. It is the necessary, tragic realization of their own self-chosen, dehumanized state. It is the permanent, final elimination of that which distorts creation, the loss of human identity itself.
This entire deep dive has really forced us to confront the reality that this central framing question of Christian faith is not what happens to me when I die.
No. The central framing question is God's purpose of rescue and recreation for the whole cosmos. Our individual destiny, our personal salvation and resurrection, is a vital piece of that puzzle, but is not the point of the whole exercise.
So the mission of the church shifts dramatically. We move away from the question, which human beings is God taking to heaven?
To the much larger, more engaged question, how will God redeem and renew his creation through human beings? The purpose of being saved, of being justified, of being given new life is so that we can take our role. And Paul uses the stunning term fellow workers with God within that vast overarching project of cosmic renewal.
So the knowledge that Jesus has risen from the dead and has ascended to rule the world, it frees us from both the self-driven ambition of the progressives who think they have to build utopia and the shallow despair of the escapists who think everything is meaningless.
We are liberated from the need to pretend we have the key to utopia, and we're simultaneously freed from the despair that comes when our best efforts and our earthly structures inevitably fail. We are called to think and act differently in the world, to engage in creative, redemptive work, because that work is not in vain.
We don't build the kingdom ourselves, but we are called to build for the kingdom. What does taking the ascension and the coming of Jesus seriously as the Lord of the world mean for your present engagement in justice and beauty and ecological care and evangelism? That is the immediate practical implication of the surprise of hope.
Indeed. It forces us out of passive waiting and into active, hopeful collaboration with the Creator. As Bishop Leslie Newbigin once powerfully synthesized this entire vision, when he was asked if he was an optimist or a pessimist, he replied, "I am neither an optimist nor a pessimist because Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. The entire cosmos is on tiptoe with expectation, waiting for that resurrection life and power to sweep through it all."